Millionaire businessman calls charity a complete waste of money, but when his daughter secretly gets involved in it, he is forced to see a shocking truth. The boardroom was impeccably polished, a reflection of Mr. Giggs's unyielding demand for perfection. The long mahogany table gleamed under the harsh lights, casting sharp reflections of the high-backed leather chairs arranged around it. At the head of the table sat Mr. Giggs himself, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. His steely blue eyes scanned the room, assessing his associates with a look that could freeze fire. He was a man in his early 50s, with silver streaks in his neatly combed dark hair, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. His face, though still handsome, was marked by the sharp lines of years spent in relentless pursuit of success. As the meeting progressed, a representative from the local charity took the floor, her voice steady yet pleading. She presented their cause, a humble organization that provided meals, education, and hope to underprivileged children in the city. Her words were passionate, her plea earnest. But as she spoke, Mr. Giggs's expression hardened. When she finished, a heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the ticking of the expensive clock on the wall. Mr. Giggs leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "I've heard enough," he declared, his voice cold and dismissive. "While I appreciate your effort, I must say, this is a complete waste of money." His words were like ice, cutting through the hope the charity representative had brought into the room. "Our resources should be invested in ventures that guarantee returns, not in causes that provide no tangible benefits to our company." His associates nodded in agreement, either too loyal or too fearful to challenge his stance. To them, Mr. Giggs was not just a boss. He was a force of nature, and defying him was unthinkable. In the hallway outside the boardroom, Emily Giggs stood frozen, her heart sinking as she overheard her father's words. She had come to the office that day to ask for some extra spending money, but what she heard left her speechless. At 16, Emily was everything her father was not: empathetic, kind-hearted, and deeply concerned about the world beyond their mansion's gates. Her auburn hair, usually tied up in a ponytail, was a tangled mess today, reflecting her current state of mind. She couldn't believe the man who had raised her, the man she had always admired for his strength, could be so indifferent to the plight of children in need. Emily's mind raced as she quietly left the office, unnoticed by anyone. She had been volunteering at the very charity her father had just dismissed. She had seen the smiling faces of children who had so little yet found joy in the simplest things. She had helped serve meals, tutor students, and organize fundraisers. To her, the charity was more than just an organization. It was a lifeline for kids who had nowhere else to turn. How could her father not see that? As she walked out into the busy streets of the city, the noise of traffic and chatter faded into the background. Emily was lost in her thoughts, her heart heavy with disappointment and anger. She loved her father, but she couldn't let this go. She knew she had to do something, but what? How could she make him understand that there was more to life than profit margins and business deals? She needed to show him that his wealth could change lives, not just his own. A plan began to form in her mind, one that would take time, patience, and a bit of risk. Emily wasn't sure if it would work, but she knew she had to try. The children at the charity deserved that much, and maybe, just maybe, she could help her father rediscover a part of himself that he had long forgotten. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Emily made her way back home, her resolve hardening with every step. The Grand Giggs mansion was a place of opulence, with marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and walls adorned with expensive artwork. Yet to Emily, it often felt more like a gilded cage than a home. Her father's expectations weighed heavily on her, and she had always done her best to meet them. Good grades, polite behavior, the perfect daughter in every sense. But as soon as the school day ended, Emily shed that carefully maintained image. She would quickly change into a simple t-shirt and jeans, grabbing her worn backpack before heading out to the small, unassuming building that housed the charity. The charity's headquarters were a stark contrast to her father's world. Located in a modest neighborhood, the building was old and weathered, its walls lined with children's drawings and bulletin boards filled with schedules and inspirational quotes. The air was often filled with the sounds of children laughing, the chatter of volunteers, and the occasional clatter from the small kitchen where meals were prepared. This place, though humble, was full of life, warmth, and purpose. Emily felt more herself here than anywhere else. Each afternoon, Emily would spend hours at the charity, tutoring the children in subjects ranging from math to English. She was patient and encouraging, her natural kindness making her a favorite among the kids. She wasn't just another wealthy teen passing through on a resume-building mission. She was deeply invested in their success. Emily found joy in watching the children's faces light up when they understood a difficult concept or proudly showed off a project they had completed. She was committed to them, and they in turn trusted her. Among the many children she tutored, Daniel was different. A quiet boy of about 12, with tousled dark hair and piercing green eyes, he carried a sense of calm maturity that belied his age. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when he did, his words were thoughtful, almost profound. Emily quickly realized that Daniel wasn't just another kid struggling to keep up with his studies. He was a genius. His mind worked in ways that amazed her. He could solve complex equations in minutes, had an insatiable curiosity about how things worked, and dreamed of one day becoming a scientist. Despite the hardships he faced at home, Daniel never complained. Instead, he focused on his goals with a determination that Emily couldn't help but admire. Daniel's story resonated deeply with Emily. She knew that he lived with his grandmother, who struggled to make ends meet, and that his circumstances were far from ideal. But Daniel never let his situation define him. Every time he talked about his dream of attending a top university and making groundbreaking discoveries, his eyes would light up with a passion that was impossible to ignore. Emily often found herself wondering how someone so young could possess such resilience and drive. It made her think about her own life, the privileges she had taken for granted, and the opportunities she had never questioned. As the days passed, Emily's admiration for Daniel grew. She saw in him a spark that could ignite into something extraordinary, if only given the chance. She began to wonder if her father, with all his power and influence, could see what she saw in these children, especially in Daniel. What would it take for him to understand that his wealth could be a force for good, that investing in these lives was not a waste but a responsibility? Emily was determined to bridge the gap between her father's world and the one she had come to care so deeply about. But for now, she kept her involvement in the charity a closely guarded secret, knowing that revealing it too soon might shut the door on any chance of changing his mind. Every time she left the charity to return home, Emily felt a pang of guilt. She knew she was deceiving her father, and she hated the dishonesty. Yet she also knew that this cause was worth the deception. It was worth every late night, every lie, and every bit of tension it might bring into their relationship. For now, she would continue to lead her double life, torn between the expectations of her family and the needs of the children she had come to love. Emily paced back and forth in her room, her thoughts whirling as she considered how to approach her father. She knew him well enough to understand that he wouldn't be swayed by emotional pleas or vague promises of good deeds. Mr. Giggs valued results, proof, and tangible success. If she wanted to change his mind, she needed to show him something undeniable, something that would cut through his cynicism and force him to reconsider his stance. Emily's eyes settled on a framed photo of her and her father from when she was younger. In it, he was smiling, a rare expression she hadn't seen in a long time. That man, she believed, was still in there somewhere, buried under years of hardened pragmatism. Her thoughts kept circling back to Daniel. If anyone could impress her father, it would be him. The boy's intelligence was beyond question, and his project for the upcoming science competition was nothing short of groundbreaking. Emily had seen it herself, a meticulous, innovative experiment on renewable energy that could revolutionize the way they thought about sustainability. Daniel had poured his heart and soul into this project, despite having access to only the most basic resources. The idea of bringing her father face to face with Daniel's brilliance began to take root in her mind. It was risky, but it was the only plan that made sense. The next day at the charity, Emily waited until Daniel had finished tutoring some younger children before pulling him aside. They sat down at one of the worn tables in the corner, where they could talk without being overheard. "Daniel, I need to ask you something," she began, her voice a mix of excitement and nerves. "I know you're working on that project for the science competition. It's amazing, by the way. I've never seen anything like it. But I was wondering, how would you feel about presenting it to someone important?" Daniel looked at her curiously, his green eyes sharp with interest. "Important? Like who?" he asked, a hint of suspicion creeping into his tone. He was used to adults making empty promises or trying to use him for their own purposes. Emily noticed the slight wariness in his expression and quickly clarified. "My father," she said, pausing to gauge his reaction. He's not exactly someone who sees the value in what we do here. But I think if he met you, saw what you've accomplished, he might change his mind." Daniel leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms thoughtfully. "Why would your dad care about what I'm doing? He's a businessman, right? He probably doesn't think much of kids like me." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of reality. Emily sighed, understanding his skepticism. "You're right, he's stubborn, but he respects success. If he sees your project, if he understands the potential it has, I think it could make a difference. And if it works, it could help a lot of other kids here too." For a moment, Daniel didn't respond. He stared down at the table, his mind clearly working through the implications. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it. But only if you think it can really make a difference. I don't want to waste my time, or yours." Emily felt a rush of relief and gratitude. "It will, Daniel. I'm sure of it. Let me handle the arrangements, and we'll make this happen." Over the next few days, Emily set her plan into motion. She contacted the organizers of the science competition and secured a date for Daniel's presentation that would allow her father to attend. She also started planting the seed in Mr. Giggs's mind, mentioning the competition casually over dinner, hinting at the potential of one of the participants without giving away too much. Her father, ever the curious strategist, seemed intrigued but non-committal. Emily knew that once he saw Daniel's work, he wouldn't be able to dismiss it so easily. The day of the presentation drew closer, and Emily's nerves grew alongside her excitement. She had never defied her father so directly before, and the possibility of failure weighed heavily on her. But she kept reminding herself of Daniel's face, of the potential she saw in him, and how much this opportunity could mean, not just for him, but for all the children the charity helped. It wasn't just about changing her father's mind. It was about showing him that success wasn't always measured in dollars and cents. Sometimes it was measured in the lives you touched and the futures you helped build. The days leading up to the competition were a blur of activity. Emily spent every afternoon at the charity, huddled over a table with Daniel as they fine-tuned his project. The small room where they worked was cluttered with notebooks, half-finished experiments, and scribbled diagrams. The air was thick with the smell of glue and the faint scent of chemicals from Daniel's experiments. Despite the chaos, there was an undercurrent of excitement, a sense that something important was about to happen. Daniel's determination was palpable, his focus unshakable as he worked late into the evening, perfecting every detail. Emily was amazed by Daniel's intellect and resilience. He approached his project with the precision of a seasoned scientist, carefully adjusting variables and recalculating measurements until everything was just right. She watched him with a mix of awe and pride, knowing that this project was more than just a school assignment, it was a lifeline. For Daniel, it was a chance to prove himself, to show that despite his circumstances, he could achieve something extraordinary. For Emily, it was a beacon of hope that could bridge the gap between her father's world and the one she had come to love. As the day of the competition drew near, Emily couldn't help but feel a growing sense of anxiety. She had put so much into this plan, and the stakes felt impossibly high. In quiet moments, doubt would creep in. What if her father dismissed Daniel's work as irrelevant, or worse, didn't even bother to attend? But every time she looked at Daniel's determined face, she found the strength to push those fears aside. "We've got this," she would tell him, offering a smile that she hoped hid her own nerves. Daniel would nod, his eyes filled with quiet confidence. "Yeah, we do," he would reply, his voice steady. On the morning of the competition, Emily was up before dawn, too restless to sleep. She dressed carefully, choosing something professional but understated, something that would blend in with the crowd. Today wasn't about her, it was about Daniel and his work. After a quick breakfast, she hurried to the charity to meet him. When she arrived, Daniel was already there, setting up his display. The project, now fully assembled, was a testament to his hard work, a sleek, functional model that demonstrated a new, efficient way to harness renewable energy. It was simple in appearance but revolutionary in concept. As the competition began, the room filled with students and judges, each one bustling with energy. The air buzzed with a mixture of excitement and nerves as participants presented their projects. Emily kept glancing at the door, her heart racing every time someone new walked in. She had managed to convince her father's assistant to schedule a business meeting at a nearby venue, hoping to lure Mr. Giggs to the competition under the guise of a coincidental visit. She had spent days perfecting the timing, and now all she could do was wait. When Mr. Giggs finally walked through the door, Emily's heart nearly stopped. He entered the room with his usual air of authority, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed out of place in the school gymnasium where the competition was being held. He scanned the room with a critical eye, clearly wondering why he had been summoned here. Emily watched from a distance, holding her breath as her father's gaze finally landed on Daniel's display. He hesitated, curiosity flickering in his eyes as he approached the project. Daniel, who had been in the middle of explaining his work to a judge, looked up in surprise as Mr. Giggs stopped in front of him. There was a brief, tense moment where neither of them spoke. Then Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Dad, this is Daniel," she introduced, keeping her tone light. "He's been working on something pretty incredible. You should take a look." Mr. Giggs glanced at his daughter, his expression unreadable, before turning his attention back to Daniel. With a deep breath, Daniel launched into his presentation. He spoke with the same confidence that had impressed Emily so many times before, explaining the science behind his project with clarity and passion. As he spoke, Mr. Giggs listened intently, his skepticism slowly giving way to interest. The more Daniel explained, the more Mr. Giggs's expression softened, his usual guarded demeanor replaced by something almost resembling admiration. By the time Daniel finished, there was a moment of silence before Mr. Giggs finally spoke. "This is remarkable," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "You've done something truly impressive here, Daniel." Emily felt a surge of hope as she watched her father's reaction. For the first time in years, she saw a glimmer of something human in his eyes, a recognition that perhaps there was more to life than profits and business deals. Mr. Giggs entered the bustling competition hall with the air of a man who had more important places to be. He glanced around the room, his mind still half occupied with the business deal that had brought him to the area. The venue, a high school gymnasium, was filled with rows of students eagerly presenting their projects to judges and spectators. Tables were adorned with colorful displays, models, and posters, each representing hours of hard work. The energy in the room was palpable, but Mr. Giggs remained detached, his interest only mildly piqued by the occasional flash of brilliance he glimpsed as he wandered through the aisles. As he moved through the crowd, Mr. Giggs was stopped by one of the event organizers, a woman with a warm smile and a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Giggs, it's a pleasure to have you here," she said, her tone respectful yet enthusiastic. "We have some truly exceptional projects this year. There's one I think you might find particularly interesting. Would you like to take a look?" Without waiting for his response, she gently steered him toward a table near the center of the room, where a young boy was setting up his display. Daniel stood behind his table, a mix of concentration and excitement on his face as he made final adjustments to his project. His model, a sleek and compact prototype for a renewable energy system, was laid out in meticulous detail. As Mr. Giggs approached, Daniel looked up, his expression brightening with the anticipation of sharing his work. "Hello, sir," Daniel greeted him, offering a hand with the polite confidence of someone who took pride in his work. "My name is Daniel. Would you like to hear about my project?" Mr. Giggs shook the boy's hand, noting the firm grip and steady gaze. There was something about the boy's demeanor that caught his attention, an earnestness that was both refreshing and unexpected. "Sure," he replied, his curiosity now genuinely piqued. "Tell me about it." As Daniel began to explain his project, his passion and knowledge became immediately evident. He spoke with the ease of someone who not only understood the technical aspects of his work, but also believed in its potential to make a real difference. The model he presented was designed to harness renewable energy in a way that was both innovative and accessible, with applications that could revolutionize how communities, especially underprivileged ones, manage their energy needs. As Daniel continued, Mr. Giggs found himself drawn deeper into the conversation. The technical jargon, which might have been overwhelming coming from someone else, flowed naturally from Daniel, making complex ideas seem simple. Mr. Giggs listened intently, his skepticism slowly melting away. The boy wasn't just reciting information, he was sharing a vision, one that was grounded in practicality, but soared with ambition. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Giggs felt a spark of genuine interest in something outside the realm of his business empire. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this," Mr. Giggs remarked, his tone more thoughtful than usual. "What inspired you to work on something like this?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, not out of uncertainty, but as if weighing how much to share. "Well, my grandmother always taught me to think about how I could help others, especially with what little we have. I've always been interested in science, and I wanted to use what I know to make something that could benefit people who don't have access to reliable energy. There are so many possibilities if we just think creatively." Mr. Giggs was struck by the boy's sincerity. In his world, success was measured by profits, but here was a young mind driven by a desire to improve lives. It was a perspective he rarely encountered, especially from someone so young. "This is impressive, Daniel," he said, nodding slowly as he looked over the model once more. "You've got a good head on your shoulders. Keep working hard, and you might just change the world one day." The conversation lingered in Mr. Giggs's mind long after he moved on to observe the other projects. There was something about Daniel, his determination, his vision, that had left a mark. It wasn't just the project itself, though it was undoubtedly impressive. It was the boy's clear sense of purpose, his belief in using his talents for something greater than himself. Mr. Giggs found himself wondering about the world Daniel lived in, a world so different from his own, yet filled with such potential. As he left the gymnasium, his thoughts remained with the young boy who had spoken with such conviction, unaware that the encounter had already begun to plant seeds of change in the heart of a man who thought he had seen it all. The car ride home from the competition was unusually quiet. Emily sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her mind racing with how to broach the topic that had been gnawing at her ever since her father met Daniel. Mr. Giggs, sitting up front, was uncharacteristically silent, lost in his own thoughts. The encounter with Daniel had left an impression on him, and Emily could sense the shift. even if he hadn't said anything yet. She knew this was the moment. She had to tell him everything. As they pulled into the long driveway of their mansion, Emily's resolve hardened. She waited until they were inside, away from the prying eyes of the household staff, before she spoke. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling under the surface. Mr. Giggs paused in the hallway, turning to face her. There was a hint of curiosity in his eyes, mingled with the remnants of the admiration he'd felt for Daniel earlier that day. "What is it, Emily?" he asked, his tone a mix of impatience and concern. Taking a deep breath, Emily launched into her explanation. "The boy you met today, Daniel, he's one of the kids from the charity you turned down, the one you said was a waste of money." She watched as her father's expression shifted from mild interest to surprise. The charity helped him get the resources and support he needed to work on that project. Without them, he wouldn't have been able to develop his ideas, let alone enter that competition. Her voice grew more impassioned as she spoke, driven by the hope that her father would finally see what she had been trying to show him all along. Mr. Giggs's face hardened as he processed this revelation. He wasn't used to being blindsided, especially not by his own daughter. "You mean to tell me that the charity I dismissed is responsible for that boy's success?" His voice was incredulous, as if the idea was too far-fetched to believe. But Emily could see the gears turning in his mind, the way his eyes narrowed as he considered the implications. "Yes, Dad. The charity gave him the chance to grow, to use his talents. Without their help, who knows where he'd be now?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. Mr. Giggs turned away, his gaze fixed on the marble floor of their opulent foyer, the weight of Emily's words sinking in. He thought back to his earlier conversation with Daniel, how the boy's ideas had sparked something in him, a rare feeling of genuine admiration that he hadn't felt in years. The realization that this brilliance might never have seen the light of day without the very charity he had so easily dismissed struck him harder than he cared to admit. Emily, sensing the shift, pressed on. "You always talk about investments, about putting money where it will grow. Isn't that exactly what the charity did with Daniel? They saw potential in him, invested in him, and now look at what he's accomplished. Imagine how many more kids could succeed if they had the same opportunities." Her voice softened, losing its edge as she added, "I'm not asking you to change everything you believe in, Dad. I'm just asking you to see that there's more than one kind of success." Mr. Giggs was quiet for a long moment, his thoughts churning. He had spent his entire career building an empire, driven by profit margins and the bottom line. The idea that his wealth could do more than just expand his business, that it could actually change lives, was unsettling, yet strangely compelling. Finally, he turned back to Emily, his expression no longer one of skepticism, but of contemplation. "I never thought about it that way," he admitted, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "You've given me a lot to think about, Emily." The tension in the room eased slightly, and Emily felt a surge of relief. She had reached him, at least she hoped she had, but she knew her father well enough to understand that this was only the beginning. His world was built on hard facts and proven results, and changing his mind wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, she saw a glimmer of possibility, a crack in the armor of the man who had always been so sure of himself. As they stood there, the vastness of the mansion around them seemed to shrink, bringing them closer together in a way they hadn't been in years. Emily could see the conflict in her father's eyes, the way he was wrestling with this new perspective. And for now, that was enough. She didn't need him to make a decision right away. All she needed was for him to keep thinking, to keep questioning, and to let the seeds of doubt take root. The days following the competition were filled with a quiet, unspoken tension in the Giggs household. Mr. Giggs, usually absorbed in his work, found himself distracted, his thoughts continually drifting back to Daniel and the charity. He was a man used to making decisions quickly, relying on his instincts and a lifetime of experience. But this was different. The image of Daniel, standing confidently by his project, kept resurfacing, accompanied by Emily's words about the charity's impact. It gnawed at him in a way he hadn't anticipated. At first, Mr. Giggs tried to push these thoughts aside, burying himself in business deals and corporate strategies. But the more he tried to focus, the more Daniel's story intruded. Finally, one evening after dinner, when the house was quiet and his usual tasks were done, he found himself sitting at his desk, his laptop open to the charity's website. He stared at the screen for a moment, almost hesitating before typing the name into the search bar. What harm could it do to learn more? As he navigated through the site, Mr. Giggs felt a growing sense of unease. He read about the programs the charity offered: tutoring, meals, healthcare services, and even scholarships for talented kids like Daniel. Each success story he came across chipped away at the rigid walls he had built around his beliefs. The images of smiling children, their lives changed by the opportunities the charity provided, struck him in a way he hadn't expected. These weren't just faceless beneficiaries. They were real kids with real potential, whose futures had been shaped by the very thing he had dismissed as a waste. In the days that followed, Mr. Giggs found himself more introspective than usual. At work, he was less sharp, his mind wandering during meetings. At home, he was quieter, often lost in thought. Emily noticed the change immediately. There was a subtle shift in his demeanor, a softness that hadn't been there before. She didn't press him, though. She knew her father well enough to understand that he needed time to process this on his own. Instead, she continued to gently nudge him in the right direction, sharing stories from the charity whenever the opportunity arose, always careful not to push too hard. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Emily mentioned a recent success story from the charity. A girl who had been struggling in school, but with the charity's help, had just been accepted into a top university. "She's incredible, Dad," Emily said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "She didn't have anything, but she worked so hard, and now she's going to make something of herself. All she needed was a little help to get there." Mr. Giggs listened, his expression thoughtful. The idea that his wealth could do more than just expand his business was becoming harder to ignore. He had spent his life building something he was proud of. But what if there was more to success than just numbers on a balance sheet? What if he could use what he had built to create something lasting, something that would outlive him? The thought both intrigued and unsettled him, challenging the very foundations of how he viewed the world. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Mr. Giggs found himself back at his desk, staring at the charity's website once again. This time, he didn't just skim the pages. He delved deep into the details, reading about the challenges the organization faced and the difference they made in the community. He saw the faces of the children they helped, each one a reminder of how much potential could be unlocked with just a bit of support. Daniel's face lingered in his mind, a symbol of what could be achieved if only he opened his heart and his wallet to something more than profit. The idea of making a donation started to take root, though he wasn't ready to act on it just yet. It was a big step, one that required him to let go of deeply ingrained beliefs. But the seeds of change had been planted, and they were growing, slowly but surely. For now, he kept these thoughts to himself, wrestling with the implications in private. Emily, ever perceptive, sensed the inner turmoil in her father, but she knew better than to rush him. Change was coming. She could feel it. And with every passing day, the walls around her father's heart seemed to weaken, just a little bit more. The news of Daniel's victory spread quickly, making waves far beyond the walls of the competition hall. The headlines praised the young boy's brilliance and determination, noting how he had beaten out students from some of the country's most prestigious schools, despite his humble background. The story became an overnight sensation, with reporters eager to uncover the boy's journey. As the details emerged, the charity that had supported him was thrust into the spotlight, receiving widespread recognition for its role in nurturing his talent. For many, Daniel's success was a heartwarming reminder of the power of community and the importance of giving back. At the Giggs mansion, Mr. Giggs read the headlines with a mixture of pride and unease. He couldn't deny the swell of admiration he felt for Daniel. Here was a boy who had faced impossible odds and triumphed. But beneath that pride was an uncomfortable truth. He had been wrong. For years, he had dismissed the idea that his wealth could be used for anything other than increasing his own fortune. Now, confronted with the undeniable success of a boy who had benefited from the very charity he had spurned, he found himself questioning everything he had once believed. That evening, the atmosphere at home was tense. Mr. Giggs sat in his study, staring at the newspaper article about Daniel's win. The room, usually a sanctuary of power and control, felt oddly suffocating. The walls, lined with books on business strategy and framed accolades, seemed to close in on him as he pondered the implications of what he had read. His thoughts were a jumble of conflicting emotions: pride in Daniel's achievement, shame at his own arrogance, and a growing sense of responsibility that he couldn't easily shake off. Emily found her father in this pensive state, his usual confidence noticeably absent. She had seen the article too, and she knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for. Gently, she approached him, her voice soft but firm. "Dad, I'm really proud of Daniel, and I know you are too." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I think we could do more than just be proud. Imagine how many more kids could achieve what Daniel has if they had the same support." Mr. Giggs looked up at her, his expression conflicted. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he just nodded, acknowledging the truth in what she was saying. Emily took a seat across from him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "You've always taught me about the importance of investing in things that matter, and I think this is one of those things. We have the means to make a real difference, Dad. We could help so many kids like Daniel." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Mr. Giggs felt a tightening in his chest, a sensation he wasn't used to: vulnerability. The idea of using his wealth for something other than business was foreign to him, but as he looked at his daughter, he realized that this was exactly what she had been trying to show him all along. He had spent so much time building walls around himself, insulating his world from anything that didn't directly contribute to his empire. But now those walls were crumbling, leaving him exposed to the possibility of something greater than profit. "Emily," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "you're right. I've been so focused on what I thought was important that I didn't see what was right in front of me. Daniel, he's incredible. And if we can help more kids like him, then maybe it's time I start thinking differently." The admission was difficult, but as the words left his mouth, he felt a strange sense of relief, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Emily reached out and placed a hand on her father's arm, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "It's never too late to start, Dad. You have the power to change lives, more than you know." Mr. Giggs looked at her, seeing not just his daughter, but a reflection of the values he had once held, before the demands of business had hardened him. For the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of purpose that wasn't tied to profit margins or market shares. It was tied to something much more profound: the opportunity to use his resources to create a legacy of kindness and support for those who needed it most. The morning air was crisp as Mr. Giggs and Emily approached the charity's modest building. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, a far cry from the towering skyscrapers Mr. Giggs was used to. The building itself was unassuming, with a simple sign above the door that read, "Community Hope Center." It was a place that radiated warmth and purpose, despite its modest exterior. As they walked up the steps, Mr. Giggs couldn't help but feel a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He had made deals worth millions without breaking a sweat. But this was different. Emily stayed close to her father, sensing his unease but also feeling a sense of pride. She had seen the shift in him over the past few days, the way his stern demeanor had softened as he grappled with the realization that he could make a real difference. Today was the day she had been hoping for, the day her father would finally see firsthand what she had been trying to show him all along. She glanced at him, offering a reassuring smile before they stepped inside. The interior of the charity was bustling with activity. The small lobby was filled with the sounds of children laughing and the hum of conversation as volunteers moved about, preparing for the day's programs. The walls were lined with colorful artwork, each piece created by the children who had found solace and opportunity within these walls. Mr. Giggs took it all in, feeling a sense of disorientation. This place, so full of life and hope, was worlds away from the sterile, profit-driven environments he was used to. For the first time, he felt a pang of regret for having dismissed such a place without ever knowing its true value. As they walked through the facility, a staff member named Mrs. Turner, a warm woman with a kind smile and a gentle demeanor, greeted them. She had been with the charity for years and knew every child's story by heart. "Welcome, Mr. Giggs. It's a pleasure to have you here," she said, her voice sincere. "We're so grateful for the chance to show you what we do." Mr. Giggs nodded, still somewhat stiff, but trying to be more open-minded. "Thank you for having me," he replied, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity that surprised even him. Mrs. Turner led them through the various rooms of the charity, introducing them to the children and volunteers who made the place what it was. They visited classrooms where kids were eagerly learning, their faces lit up with excitement as they absorbed new knowledge. In the dining area, they saw children sharing meals, their laughter echoing through the space. Each room they entered told a story of resilience and hope, stories that Mr. Giggs couldn't ignore. He watched as the children interacted with the volunteers, their joy and gratitude evident in every smile. At one point, they stopped in front of a bulletin board filled with letters from children who had benefited from the charity. Mr. Giggs read a few, his heart tightening with each word. These were kids who had faced unimaginable challenges: poverty, broken homes, a lack of opportunities, and yet, through the charity's efforts, they had found hope and a chance for a better future. It was a sobering realization for Mr. Giggs, one that made him feel the full weight of his previous dismissal of their work. He was moved in a way he hadn't anticipated, the emotional impact of seeing these children's lives transformed, stirring something deep within him. Finally, they gathered in the small office where the charity's director, Mr. Harris, awaited them. A man in his late 50s, with a kind face marked by years of dedication, he stood to greet them. "Mr. Giggs, it's an honor to meet you," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for taking the time to visit us." Mr. Giggs shook his hand, feeling the sincerity in Mr. Harris's grip. "The honor is mine," he responded, his voice steady. "I've seen today what I should have seen a long time ago. Your work here? It's incredible. I'm ashamed I didn't realize it sooner." There was a moment of silence as everyone absorbed the significance of his words. Then, with a deep breath, Mr. Giggs made his decision. "I want to help," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I'd like to make a substantial donation to ensure that you can continue this important work and reach even more children." The room filled with a quiet sense of astonishment and gratitude. Emily, standing beside her father, felt a rush of pride and relief. The moment she had been hoping for had finally arrived. Later that day, Mr. Giggs publicly announced his donation, a move that quickly caught the attention of the media. The story of his change of heart became a topic of discussion, with many praising his decision to use his wealth to support such a worthy cause. For Mr. Giggs, the decision was not about the recognition, but about doing what he now knew was right. As the news spread, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years, a realization that he had not just changed his mind, but had also begun to change his life. The transformation in Mr. Giggs was nothing short of remarkable. In the weeks following his donation, he immersed himself in the charity's work, dedicating time and resources in a way that surprised even those closest to him. No longer content with merely writing a check, he sought to understand the deeper challenges the charity faced, attending meetings, strategizing with the staff, and brainstorming ways to expand their impact. The sterile, profit-driven mindset that had once defined him began to dissolve, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and compassion. The charity's modest headquarters became a second home to Mr. Giggs. He was often seen there, sleeves rolled up, working alongside volunteers. He took the time to speak with the children, listening to their stories and learning about their dreams. These interactions touched him deeply, each child's resilience and hope, reinforcing the conviction that he was finally doing something meaningful. For the first time in his life, Mr. Giggs found fulfillment not in the balance sheets of his business, but in the smiles of the children who now looked up to him as a benefactor. Emily watched her father's transformation with a mixture of pride and amazement. The man who had once been so distant, so consumed by his empire, was now fully engaged in a cause that had become just as important to her. Their relationship, once strained by his single-minded pursuit of wealth, began to flourish in this new chapter of their lives. They spent hours discussing plans for the charity, dreaming up new ways to help even more children. Emily felt closer to her father than she ever had before, their shared mission bridging the gap that had long separated them. As Mr. Giggs's involvement with the charity grew, so did his influence. He reached out to his vast network of business contacts, urging them to support the cause. His reputation, once synonymous with cold, calculated efficiency, began to shift. Colleagues and competitors alike took note of his change in focus. Many were inspired by his example, and soon other businesses were following suit, making donations and offering resources to the charity. The ripple effect was undeniable. What had started as one man's change of heart was quickly becoming a movement, one that promised to transform the lives of countless children. The media was quick to pick up on Mr. Giggs's transformation, and stories of his philanthropy spread. Interviews, profiles, and news segments highlighted his journey from a ruthless businessman to a compassionate philanthropist. While Mr. Giggs was never one to seek the spotlight, he understood the importance of using his platform to raise awareness for the charity's work. He gave interviews not to promote himself, but to share the stories of the children who had inspired him, emphasizing the importance of supporting organizations that made a real difference. The charity, once struggling to make ends meet, now flourished with the influx of donations and support. New programs were launched, reaching more children than ever before. The staff, who had always believed in their mission, were invigorated by the newfound resources and the public recognition of their work. The impact of Mr. Giggs's involvement was felt in every corner of the community, as children who had once been overlooked were now given the opportunities they deserved. For Mr. Giggs, the greatest reward was not the accolades or the public praise, but the knowledge that he was making a real, lasting difference. He had learned that true success wasn't measured by wealth or power, but by the positive impact one could have on the lives of others. His journey had taught him humility, compassion, and the immense value of giving back. And as he stood beside Emily, watching the children at the charity celebrate another milestone, he knew that he had found a new purpose, one that would define the rest of his life. Emily, standing proudly by his side, couldn't have been happier. They had not only strengthened their bond, but had also created a legacy of kindness and generosity that would outlast them both. The story of Mr. Giggs's transformation was a powerful reminder to everyone that it's never too late to change, to do the right thing, and to make a difference in the world. Together, they had not only changed the lives of the children at the charity, but had also inspired a community to believe in the power of compassion and the importance of giving back. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.